was envisioning those things in my mind, an image began to coalesce in that magical place in the flames in front of me. And it frightened me. And I thought about getting up and leaving, and I did not. I looked down and blinked my eyes, and when I looked back up, it was still there. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is a reality. What I'm saying is that this is my experience that led me to an understanding. I'm going to share this with you. I watched this image as it coalesced, and it became denser and denser and denser until I could see that it was the head and part of the chest of a being that I had seen in my mind's eye, hovering in the flames in front of me, and it was looking away from me, fortunately, which gave me an opportunity to study what this phenomenon was that was happening, this thing that was in front of me. And I did, and rather than feeling fear, my fear moved into fascination. And I simply began to look, and I was fascinated at the folds and the creases in the saggy flesh and the scaliness at the same time that was shimmering in this fire. And while I was experiencing that fascination, the image began to rotate and the face began to turn toward me until it was facing me full on. And at that time, I had the opportunity to look eye to eye into the flames, into this thing that I had conjured up. To me, that was the epitome of all darkness or all evil as I'd been conditioned to believe it in my life. And I simply stared. I know now the entire experience lasted about 22 minutes. And when you're having an experience like that, it seems like an eternity. As I stared, something began to happen. The image of the epitome of evil, what to me was the epitome of evil in the flames, began to change, and it got softer and softer and softer. And in just a few short moments, replacing the hideous image that had been there earlier was the face of a very young child. Neither male nor female, it was simply a child that was in the flames. And the child looked at me. And as I looked at this child, I felt this tremendous sense of sadness well up from within me. And the child had huge tears coming down its cheeks, and I found myself with tears coming down my cheeks at the same time. With that experience, I began to re-examine my conditioning, and that led me on a path through many ancient, obscure, and esoteric texts. And what I'll share with you now is what I believe is perhaps the greatest potential of our healing, of any illusion of separation between us and our world and our Creator, and the source of all that we will ever know as fear. And think about that. I asked you this morning to describe to me the negative characteristics of your primary caretakers, and we had many different words, many different perspectives that had the underlying aspect of fear. And I said, of all of these different expressions, they all pretty much resolve to one or some combination of those three universal fears. Now the Essenes offer us a path and take it one step further. They say, as you heal, not if, as you heal this memory, then you have healed those universal fears. So in simply healing a single memory, fear is no longer possible in your life. In simply healing a single memory. Well, let's take a look at that memory. When we talk about light and dark in our world, we have, historically, we have images that come to mind when we think of light and dark. If darkness and light are equal and different only in seeming, as we're told in the ancient texts, and they are benign forces in service to us rather than forces that either like or do not like us, that's a very different world that we're living in. Very different. It is only possible for you to feel judgment and rigidity and anger and selfishness and abuse, control issues, or to have those experiences within yourself if you still have allowed for fear in your life. The only way that fear is possible is if you believe that dark and light are separate from one another and that the darkness is something other than our Creator. If you allow for the possibility that darkness is part of our Creator, just as light, however you view your Creator, it makes no difference. If you allow for that possibility that there's a single source of all that we'll ever know in our world, and it has many different forms of expression, it is impossible to fear. Your body mirrors your belief in the relationship between light and dark. Your body mirrors your belief. Illness is only possible if you believe that those forces are separate. Death is only possible if you believe those forces are separate. And as you allow for the possibility of the marriage of those two forces in service to you, your body mirrors that biologically. You mirror that through your immune system. You mirror that through the way your cells rebuild themselves. You mirror that in your relationships with one another, and life becomes very, very different. Because it is no longer possible to fear or to hate if all there is love in our world. What I believe has happened is that here we are in this paradigm. We have had such a tremendous acceleration of technology out here. We now witness the moment of conception live in a human womb. Not a still photograph. We witness it live. We have witnessed DNA passing between a sperm and an egg. We have peered into the depths of the quantum world of the atom, and we've sent these extensions of our perceptions deep into interstellar space beyond the boundaries of our solar system, on the one hand. And on the other hand, we're still trying to reconcile what happens in our world in terms of forces in dark and light, good and bad, devils and angels. I believe that path has served us very well. I bless that path. And I believe that very rapidly you've outgrown that path. And now, because that path has served you so well, it's brought you to the point, all of us, we're all in this together, it's brought us to this point where we may redefine now what the events of our life mean. When we witness, you turn on the 6 o'clock news and you see something that has hurt you, what do you do with that? How do you reconcile that? You say, if all that's here is love, and I'm witnessing 10,000 Rwandans massacred, laying dead on the side of the road by their own people, how do I reconcile that? What does that mean? Or typically what you'll hear is, how can God let that happen? Well, if we allow for the possibility that there's a single source of all that is in this world, then you have just opened the door and paved the path. You're allowing for a much greater possibility that the ancients called the science of compassion. Until we can reconcile those two forces, compassion may not make a lot of sense. The seventh mystery of relationship, the seventh Essene mirror, from the perspective of the ancients, was the most subtle and for some the most difficult. This is the mirror that asks us to allow for the possibility that each experience of life, regardless of its outcome, is perfect in its nature. Regardless of whether or not we achieve the lofty goals that have been set by others, we're asked, we're invited to view our accomplishments in life without comparing them to anything else, without any external reference. The only way that we may view ourselves in failure or success is when we measure our accomplishments to an external yardstick. And the question then arises, what is it that we hold ourselves accountable to? What is it that we use as our yardstick of accomplishment? From the perspective of this mirror, we're asked to allow for the possibility that all aspects of our lives, each aspect of our personal life, whether it's our body shape or our body weight, or our academic or business or athletic achievements are perfect as they stand. And we will see that they are, in fact, that way, and can only be judged when they are compared to an external reference. We're invited to allow for ourselves to be that reference. The last mirror the ancients considered the most subtle mirror. And to share with you this mirror, I'm going to share it in a couple of different ways, a couple of different stories. One of my last years in the corporate environment, I shared an office with a woman because our office space was limited. So we had very different functions and simply shared space together. And because there was no competition, we became very good friends. We just simply spoke with one another, went to lunch together a lot. One day we came back from lunch and she picked up her voicemail, and as she was listening to her messages, I saw her face turn sheet white and she sat down, and I said, "What happened?" And she shared with me a story, and I'm going to share that story with you now to illustrate this mirror. She had just had a friend that was her age that had a young daughter. This daughter had graduated from high school just a couple of years earlier. A beautiful young woman, was extremely gifted in many areas. She was very athletic, she excelled at academics, she was a wonderful artist, and she chose to become a model when she graduated from high school, and her parents supported her in that choice. She had done some modeling and done very well. She had gone to as a modeling school in New York City, and had just completed a series of jobs, and it appeared that 2 years out of high school she was on her way to a pretty successful modeling career. Well, after the first couple of jobs, the modeling agencies began to say, for this kind of work you'll have to change your appearance a little bit. And they started with some obvious things, and they, even at her young age, they did some tucks around her midline. They enlarged her breasts, relatively common kinds of plastic surgery. Her parents supported her in that, and they said, well, that's what this industry takes. That's what it takes. Well, it wasn't long before the modeling agencies began asking for more extreme forms of modification. And for example, she had a really cute little overbite when she'd smile. And they said, well, you can't have an overbite and be a model. So they asked her, and she did, underwent a procedure where her jaws were broken and reset, wired shut. And the idea was that the overbite would be gone. And to be honest, I saw before and after pictures. I could see very little difference. I really could see very little difference. And I thought the overbite was kind of nice. Well, while her jaws had been wired, of course, she was on limited diet. She lost quite a bit of weight, and which is generally desirable in the modeling industry. And as she lost that weight, some of these ribs, the lower ribs, floating ribs, began to stick out more than they had before. And the modeling people said, well, that's no problem. We can address that surgically. And they did. They went in and took out these 2 floating ribs on either side. And something began to happen with her. And maybe you've seen this before. Body weight kind of goes in modes. I was a competitive runner for almost 20 years. And there were some times I could eat anything, no matter what it was. And I just couldn't keep weight on my body. And there were other times I could think about eating and not do it, and I would gain weight. And your body kind of goes into a mode. You can stop eating for a while, and you'll still maintain a constant weight, or maybe even gain weight. And you can begin to lose weight, and then you say, okay, well, that's enough. I'll start eating again, and your body is still in a lose weight mode, and it keeps going. And that's what happened to this woman. She began to lose weight and was in a lose weight mode, and the phone call that my friend had that morning was from the young girl's mother. Her daughter had just died in the hospital from complications of malnutrition in the hospital because her body could not assimilate that weight. And my question was, why did this happen? Why? What was it all about? A few months ago, Melissa and I were traveling. We live in where we have to fly out of Albuquerque to get to anywhere. And on certain airlines, I won't mention airline names, but certain airlines, you have to go through Dallas before you go anywhere else. So when I went to Toronto, I had to go from Albuquerque to Dallas to get to Toronto, or to Kansas City to go to Dallas. Well, if you've been to DFW, you know Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. It's a huge airport, and there's a tram system that takes you from concourse to